What if the greatest mistake a millionaire ever made wasn't losing money, but losing the one person who truly cared? In the heart of Nashville, inside the marble halls of a historic hotel, a secretary named Grace Whitaker carried more than schedules and memos. She carried the memory of faces, the stories of workers too often forgotten, and a handwritten letter from a mother who believed leadership was about kindness, not numbers. But when Ethan Caldwell, the heir to a vast fortune, returned to his family empire, he dismissed her care as weakness. In front of investors, cameras, and colleagues, he humiliated her, stripping away not just her job, but her dignity. Yet, here is the question: what happens when the secretary who was silenced becomes the voice the entire industry cannot ignore? What happens when kindness proves stronger than profit? This is the story of betrayal and redemption, of loss and quiet triumph, of a man who had everything until he fired the secretary who truly cared. Before we begin, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss the stories that shine light on the human spirit. In every great hotel, there is a heart no one notices. It is not the chandelier in the lobby or the polished brass railings. It is the person who remembers every first name, who notices when a uniform sleeve is fraying, who catches the sigh of someone too tired to speak. For Caldwell House in Nashville, that heart was Grace Whitaker. Grace was 36, and her life moved with the rhythm of the hotel itself. Every morning, she walked through Centennial Park before sunrise, the dew still fresh on the grass. She carried a small thermos of coffee in a paper bag with 2 muffins, one for herself and one for whichever security guard she met at the staff entrance. By the time the city began to stir, Grace had already been at her desk for an hour. She arranged the shiftboard on the wall, not with the indifference of an administrator, but with quiet care. When she saw that Anna from housekeeping had been scheduled for a double, she made a note to check if her mother's dialysis appointment could be accommodated. Grace would later swap a shift with another worker, slipping a thank you note into the pocket of their locker. It was the kind of thing nobody saw, yet everyone felt. Her office wasn't grand. It had a window that overlooked the back alley where delivery trucks rumbled in and out. On her desk stood a worn leather planner, a jar of peppermint candies, and a single photograph of her parents from a long-ago trip to the Smoky Mountains. In the bottom drawer, tucked beneath files and invoices, was something far more precious: a letter. The letter was handwritten on ivory stationery. Its ink had faded slightly, but the words were still strong. It came from Margaret Caldwell, Ethan's mother, who had passed away nearly a decade earlier. Grace had been young when she first started at Caldwell House, barely out of college, and Mrs. Caldwell had taken her under her wing. The letter was Margaret's gift, written during her last summer alive. It urged whoever carried it to remember that a hotel was not marble, not crystal, not balance sheets. A hotel was people. If you remember the faces, she had written, you will never lose the soul of this house. Grace had kept it folded and safe, as if it were a compass she could return to whenever she felt the world shift too far toward profit and away from kindness. On that particular morning, the September air was crisp. The investor showcase was only 2 days away, and the building buzzed with preparations. Staff hurried with clipboards, electricians checked light fixtures in the ballroom, and floral deliveries filled the corridors with the smell of lilies and roses. Grace moved through it all like a conductor guiding an unseen orchestra. She straightened name tags, reminded the kitchen about a guest's nut allergy, and arranged extra blankets for an elderly couple who always requested room 312. Every act was small, almost invisible, but together they created a harmony that guests would later describe as the warmth of coming home. Still, there was a weight pressing on her chest. She knew that the showcase was not only about attracting investors, it was also about Ethan. He had returned from New York with sharper suits and sharper plans. Rumors spread that he wanted to streamline operations, introduce kiosks, cut back on front desk staff. Grace worried that the essence of Caldwell House, the welcome at the door, the stories shared in the lobby, would vanish beneath cold efficiency. Late that evening, long after most of the staff had gone, Grace sat at her desk in the quiet office. She opened the bottom drawer and pulled out the letter once more. Her fingers traced the careful script of Margaret Caldwell. She could almost hear the woman's voice, warm and steady, reminding her that success without humanity was no success at all. Grace closed her eyes and whispered to the empty room, "I'll remember. I promise." The next morning, she tucked the letter back into its place, smoothing the edges as if it were a fragile treasure. She locked the drawer and slid the key into her pocket. Around her, the hotel hummed with anticipation for the showcase. None of the glitter, none of the investors, none of the speeches knew that inside that drawer lay words that could alter the fate of the entire empire. Grace didn't know it either. She only knew that her duty was to keep the heart of Caldwell House beating, even if no one ever noticed. And so, she rose from her chair, collected her planner, and stepped into the corridor once again, ready to tend to the details that built the soul of a place. The letter remained behind, quiet and unseen. But one day soon, it would no longer be silent. He came back to Nashville with polished shoes and charts tucked under his arm, but none of the warmth that made a house feel like home. Ethan Caldwell was 44, handsome in the way men who never lifted their own luggage often were. He carried himself like someone used to being obeyed. The marble floor of Caldwell House reflected his steps as he strode through the lobby, nodding curtly at the doorman who rushed to open the glass door. Guests noticed him, but employees watched more carefully. To them, he was not just a figure in a tailored suit. He was the heir who had the power to change every paycheck, every shift, every life. Grace stood near the reception desk that morning, speaking quietly with a front desk clerk about an elderly guest who preferred extra thick blankets. She glanced up when she heard Ethan's voice, clipped and businesslike, greeting the operations manager. The atmosphere shifted immediately. Where there had been gentle conversation and small laughter, silence spread like frost. Later that day, the boardroom filled with executives, department heads, and a handful of staff chosen to listen. Grace sat near the corner, notebook open, her careful handwriting ready to capture decisions. She wasn't supposed to speak, not in rooms like these, but she always listened, and sometimes listening told her more than the charts ever could. Ethan clicked his remote, and the screen lit up with sleek graphics, lines, bars, percentages. He spoke of efficiency, modernization, cost reduction. His voice was confident, his words rehearsed. The centerpiece of his plan was bold: remove most of the front desk staff and replace them with self-service kiosks. Guests would check in by scanning their IDs. Payments would be processed instantly. The savings, he explained, would be substantial. The room shifted uneasily. A few executives nodded, others frowned. Grace watched the front desk manager lower her eyes. Knowing what such a plan meant for her team, the soul of hospitality warm smiles, familiar greetings, gentle reassurances for weary travelers was being traded for machines. Grace's heart pounded. She thought of Margaret Caldwell's letter in her drawer, the reminder that a hotel was people, not marble. She thought of Anna in housekeeping, of the doorman who remembered children's names, of the widow who returned every Christmas because the staff knew her late husband's favorite drink. Could a kiosk know any of that? When the meeting opened for comments, Grace hesitated. Her role was clear record, not contribute. Yet something stronger than protocol pushed her forward. She cleared her throat gently and lifted her eyes to Ethan. "Mr. Caldwell," she began, her voice calm but steady. "I prepared a memo I believe may be relevant. It's called Care for the Front Line." Ethan's eyes narrowed slightly, but he gestured for her to continue. Grace spoke slowly, choosing her words with care. The proposal suggests 3 initiatives. First, emotional training for frontline staff, to help them recognize and respond to guests' needs beyond the obvious. Second, a small emergency fund for employees, what I called the Warm Hands Fund, so staff facing sudden hardship don't feel abandoned. Third, a symbolic practice we could call the Front Porch Promise. It would remind us to treat each guest as though they were stepping onto our own front porch at home. Her words hung in the air, soft but firm. Several people around the table nodded faintly. One board member even whispered, "That could set us apart." But Ethan's expression did not soften. He leaned back, folding his arms. His reply came cool and precise. "Grace, you were asked here as a secretary, not as a strategist. Let's not confuse duties." The sting burned hot on her cheeks. She lowered her gaze but kept her posture straight. Around the room, others shifted uncomfortably. No one spoke in her defense, though a few eyes flicked toward her with sympathy. The meeting continued, filled with numbers and projections. But for Grace, the sound grew muffled, like static over a radio. She scribbled notes mechanically, her mind replaying Ethan's words. Not as a strategist, just a secretary. Yet, even in the ache of dismissal, a quiet resolve formed. She had spoken because she believed the truth mattered, and if her words were ignored today, she knew the day would come when they would matter more than any chart. When the meeting adjourned, Grace gathered her notebook. She moved quietly through the hall, her heels clicking softly against the tile. In her pocket, the small key to her desk drawer pressed against her palm. Inside that drawer lay the letter, silent but waiting. She already sensed it. The real confrontation had not yet come. The showcase would not just be about investors. It would be about two visions colliding, one of profit, one of people. And she knew, deep in her chest, that the clash was inevitable. She had prepared folders for everyone, color-coded, neatly labeled, each page checked twice. Yet before the day ended, she would carry out a box of her own belongings. The investor showcase filled the grand ballroom with light and noise. Crystal chandeliers shimmered overhead, and rows of chairs faced a stage where Ethan Caldwell stood rehearsing his polished speech. Investors, board members, and journalists gathered, their conversations humming like bees. Cameras were set up for the live broadcast, their red lights blinking. Grace moved quietly at the edges, ensuring the water pitchers were full, the name tags aligned, the folders distributed. She wore a simple navy dress, professional but modest. Her notebook rested against her arm, ready for last-minute adjustments. She told herself she was only there to support, nothing more. The program began with Ethan presenting his vision. Charts appeared on the giant screen, lines climbing, costs dropping, efficiency rising. His voice was smooth, calculated, built to impress. He spoke of technology, modernization, and new standards of hospitality. The audience listened politely, but their expressions were careful. Hospitality was not software or spreadsheets. It was memory, kindness, humanity. Many in the room knew it. Few dared to say it. Then came the panel portion. Investors were invited to ask questions. One man raised his hand, a longtime client who had stayed at Caldwell House for 20 years. His question was simple. How will these changes affect the guest experience? I don't want to lose the warmth I've always known here. For a moment, Ethan hesitated. His answer hovered unfinished. And then, almost carelessly, he gestured toward the corner where Grace stood. Perhaps our secretary can speak to that. She spends plenty of time observing guests. The spotlight swung without warning. Grace felt the eyes of the room turn toward her. She rose slowly, her palms damp, her heart pounding. She could have deflected, could have remained silent, but the letter in her drawer seemed to whisper in her ear. She took a breath. "Thank you," she began softly. "Guest experience isn't just service, it's recognition. It's being seen. That's why I drafted a framework called Hearthline." Her voice grew steadier as she continued. "It has 3 pillars. First, emotional training for our staff, so they notice needs that aren't spoken, aren't. Second, the Warm Hands Fund, a small pool for employees facing hardship, because when staff feel cared for, guests feel it too. And third, a symbolic tradition we call the Front Porch Promise, greeting every guest as if they were stepping onto our own front porch. It is about presence, not just process. A murmur spread through the audience. Several nodded, Some even smiled. It was tangible, this vision of hospitality that went beyond marble floors. But Ethan's expression darkened. He cut in sharply, his words slicing through the room. "Grace, enough." The microphones carried his voice across the ballroom. He straightened his jacket and faced the investors with a cold smile. "Let me clarify. Miss Whitaker is a secretary. Her role is administrative, not strategic. What you've just heard is an example of someone stepping far beyond her responsibilities." The silence was immediate. Cameras caught every word. Investors shifted uncomfortably. Board members avoided eye contact. Grace stood frozen, the blood draining from her face. Ethan didn't stop. His voice hardened. "We run this company on proven principles, not sentimental notions. And while loyalty is appreciated, misguided ambition is not. Effective immediately, Miss Whitaker's employment with Caldwell House is terminated." The words struck like a blow. Public, final, irreversible. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The chandeliers seemed to hum louder, the air thick. Grace felt tears sting at the edges of her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She straightened her shoulders, walked to her small table, and gathered her things into the box she had brought for materials. How ironic that it now carried her life instead. As she walked toward the exit, heels clicking against marble, she passed rows of faces, some pitying, some shocked, some quietly furious but silent. The cameras followed her, broadcasting her humiliation to anyone watching the live stream. She kept her head high. She would not give Ethan the satisfaction of seeing her crumble. When she reached the glass doors of the ballroom, she paused only for the briefest second. Somewhere behind her, Ethan's voice echoed as he resumed his pitch, as though nothing had happened. But Grace knew he had lost more than a secretary, and though she did not look back, deep down, she felt that the real story of Caldwell House had just shifted. Unemployment is never silent. It screams through rejection emails and through bills spread across a kitchen counter. For Grace Whitaker, the days after her dismissal blurred into a rhythm of silence and sting. She rose early out of habit, brewed her coffee, and opened her laptop. Each morning began with hope, and each afternoon ended with the familiar ping of decline. "Thank you for your interest. We've decided to move forward with other candidates. Not the right fit for our current needs." The words changed, but the meaning never did. Behind them, she could almost hear Ethan's voice, labeling her as reckless, unprofessional, insubordinate. It was clear someone had spoken against her. The industry was small, stories traveled quickly, and once branded difficult, no company wanted to take a chance. Her savings thinned fast. Nashville rent was merciless. She trimmed every corner, no more weekend flowers for the table, no more evening takeout when she was too tired to cook. She sold jewelry she had inherited, canceled her gym membership, cut her grocery list down to essentials. Still, the numbers in her checkbook fell like leaves in October. One Saturday morning, she sat on the floor of her apartment, staring at her grandfather's old rocking chair. Its paint was worn, the arms smooth from decades of hands. She remembered him sitting there on summer nights, humming old hymns, his pipe sending curls of smoke into the twilight. The chair carried her childhood. Now it carried a price tag. Grace listed it online, telling herself it was only wood and nails. But when the buyer came, a young couple setting up their first home, she touched the armrest one last time before letting them carry it out. The apartment felt emptier than ever. At night, she tossed in bed, haunted by flashes of the ballroom, Ethan's voice echoing, the cameras recording her humiliation. She tried to fight the memory, but it returned uninvited. Sometimes she woke with her fists clenched, her heart racing, as if she were still standing in front of that silent, staring crowd. When sleep refused to come, she walked. Nashville's streets offered a strange kind of comfort. Neon lights buzzed, music spilled from bars, and strangers laughed in doorways. Life went on, indifferent to her unraveling. One night she wandered farther than usual, drawn toward the cemetery where Margaret Caldwell rested. She hadn't planned it, but her feet carried her there. The gates creaked as she pushed them open. The grass was damp with evening dew. She found the familiar stone simple, elegant, with Margaret's name etched in graceful script. Grace knelt and brushed away a fallen leaf. She remembered the woman's kindness, the afternoons when Margaret would stop by her desk with tea and a gentle word. Grace had once carried Margaret's shawl when the older woman felt chilled, had listened to her speak about the meaning of hospitality. "It is not service," Margaret had said. "It is welcome." Now Grace whispered into the night. "I tried to keep it alive. I really did." Her voice cracked, but no tears fell. The well inside her felt too dry. She laid a small bunch of daisies against the stone, cheap, the only flowers she could afford, but honest. Sitting there, she felt both empty and strangely grounded. Margaret had believed in her. Somewhere deep down, that mattered more than the scorn of Ethan or the silence of the investors. She stayed until the chill forced her to rise. As she walked back through the quiet streets, she knew she had reached the bottom. Her money was thin, her career stained, her future uncertain, but inside, a small ember refused to go out. She could lose furniture, jobs, even reputation, but she would not lose herself. Back at her apartment, she stood before the mirror. Her eyes were tired, her face thinner, but her posture was straight. She touched the key in her pocket, the one that still fit the drawer at Caldwell House. The letter was gone from her reach now, locked behind doors she could no longer open. Yet its words were etched into her memory. "If you remember the faces, you will never lose the soul." She repeated it to herself like a prayer. And in that quiet kitchen, surrounded by bills and rejection slips, Grace made a promise: they can strip away everything else, but they cannot take away my choice to remain kind. Betrayal doesn't knock. It flashes across a glowing screen, wrapped in headlines and sinking numbers. Grace was at her kitchen table when the message came. It was from Tessa, short and sharp. "You need to see this." Attached was a link. With a sigh, Grace clicked. The page loaded, bright and polished, bearing the Caldwell crest. Introducing Caldwell Care 2.0. The video played with triumphant music. Ethan stood before cameras, announcing a new initiative to redefine hospitality. He spoke of efficiency, personalization, innovation. The slogans were sleek, the graphics professional. But as Grace watched, her stomach tightened. Every phrase, every diagram, she recognized them. The 3 pillars she had presented at the showcase were there, reshaped and renamed. Emotional training reduced to a slide about customer interaction modules. The Warm Hands Fund twisted into employee efficiency bonuses. The Front Porch Promise diluted into expedited greetings. It was her work, stripped of its soul. Grace leaned back, her chest hollow. Anger rose like fire, but so did grief. It wasn't just theft, it was erasure. The ideas she had nurtured with care were paraded as someone else's triumph, emptied of the humanity that gave them meaning. Her phone buzzed again, another message from Tessa. This time, it was a video clip not from Caldwell, but from a guest's cell phone. The shaky footage showed a veteran at the front desk of Caldwell House. He held his ID in a trembling hand, trying to navigate the new kiosk system. The machine beeped error after error. Staff, reduced in number, looked helpless. "Finally," the man muttered, "forget it," and turned away. His shoulders bent. The video ended with the caption, "This is hospitality." Grace's throat tightened. She replayed the clip, watching the man's dignity crumble. In her heart, she whispered an apology to a stranger she had never met. The fallout came quickly. Online reviews plummeted. Guests complained of cold interactions, long waits, broken machines. I felt like a barcode. One wrote, "Not a guest." Employees, demoralized, began resigning. Housekeepers left mid-shift. Clerks walked away from desks. What had once been a living, breathing place began to hollow out. Grace read the reports with a strange mix of sorrow and clarity. She had warned them. She had spoken of warmth, of presence, of promises. And now the difference was undeniable. Policies could be printed on glossy paper, but promises lived only in actions. Caldwell Care 2.0 was a policy. Hearthline had been a promise. Sitting alone in her apartment, she stared at the glow of her laptop. For weeks she had felt powerless, silenced by rejection and debt. But watching Caldwell stumble under the weight of its own choices, she felt a flicker of strength return. They had stolen her framework, but they could never replicate the heart behind it. She closed the laptop gently. Her apartment was still bare, her future uncertain, but her resolve sharpened. "It's time," she whispered to herself. "Time to do it the right way, the human way." The night outside was quiet. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed, then faded. Grace sat in the silence, her hands steady at last. The betrayal had wounded her. Yes, but it had also given her a gift proof that her vision mattered. Without its soul, it failed. With it, it could change everything. She rose, turned off the lamp, and let the darkness settle around her. Tomorrow, she would begin again, and this time, she would not let anyone steal it. Opportunity often has the face of a builder, not an heir. The call came on a gray Tuesday morning. Grace was sipping weak coffee at her kitchen counter, scrolling through another list of rejection notices, when her phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. She almost ignored it, assuming it was another polite decline. But something made her answer. Grace Whitaker. The voice was warm, low, steady. "This is Rebecca Holcomb. I'm the CEO of Hearth and Harbor Hospitality." Grace blinked, startled. She knew the name. Rebecca had built her company from scratch, starting with a single inn in Vermont and growing it into a chain known for charm and integrity. Unlike the Caldwells, Rebecca's empire was not inherited. It was earned. "I've followed your work for some time," Rebecca continued, "especially what you tried to share at Caldwell House." There was a pause, almost protective. "I know what happened to you there, and I know they took your ideas and twisted them. I don't believe in letting visionaries be silenced." Grace's breath caught. Her instinct was to doubt. Too many weeks of rejection had trained her to expect disappointment. Still, she listened. Rebecca's tone carried no pity, only respect. "I want you to join us as Chief Experience Officer. You'll have full autonomy to implement your framework Hearthline, exactly as you designed it. We'll start with Savannah and Charleston, two properties where warmth matters as much as walls." Grace's mind swirled. Chief Experience Officer, a leadership role, authority, a chance not just to survive, but to shape. The words felt almost unreal. She set her coffee down, her hands trembling. "Why me?" she asked quietly. Rebecca chuckled gently. "Because you see what too many of us forget, that hospitality is human first. You protected the heart of a house until they threw you out. That kind of courage is what we need." Grace looked around her apartment, still half empty from what she had sold. She thought of rejection emails, of nights at Margaret Caldwell's grave, of the rocking chair carried away by strangers. Fear tugged at her, whispering of failure, of being crushed again. But beneath the fear was something sturdier faith that her work mattered. "Will I have the resources?" she asked. "You'll have the team you choose," Rebecca replied firmly, "and you'll have me in your corner. I don't back down from men like Ethan Caldwell. I've been fighting them my whole career." The line went quiet for a beat. Grace felt her heart thudding, each pulse a drumbeat urging her forward. She closed her eyes, inhaled slowly, and let the fear settle. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, steady. "Yes, I'll do it." Relief rushed through her, like opening a window after months of stale air. Rebecca's voice warmed with approval. "Good. We'll send over the contract. Welcome aboard. Grace, let's build something that lasts." After the call ended, Grace sat in silence, her hands pressed against her lap. She almost laughed at the suddenness of it, the way life could pivot in a single morning. She walked to the mirror, stared at her reflection, and saw not just a secretary, not just the woman humiliated on camera. She saw a leader about to rise again. That evening, she spread maps of Savannah and Charleston across her table. She marked notes about their guests, families visiting the historic squares. retirees drawn to the coast, young couples seeking romance under Spanish moss. These weren't just customers. They were people who carried stories, who deserved to be seen. Grace touched her pen to the page and began sketching the outlines of Hearthline, as it was meant to be emotional training sessions that went beyond scripts, a true warm hands fund for employees in need, a front porch promise that would be lived with sincerity. Her fear still lingered, but it was joined now by something stronger, a quiet determination. For the first time in months, she smiled. It wasn't wide, not yet. It trembled, unsure. But it was real, and with that small, steady smile, a new chapter began. Some teams are bought with money. Others are bound by loyalty and old scars. Grace knew she could not build Hearthline alone. Savannah and Charleston offered beautiful spaces, but walls and porches meant little without people to carry the heart of the promise. So, she began making calls. The first was to Tessa. Her old friend didn't hesitate. "You had me the moment you said heart," she laughed. "I'll pack my bags tonight." Next came two women from housekeeping. Maria and Linda had each given more than 20 years to Caldwell House. Both had resigned after the humiliation at the showcase, unwilling to keep working under Ethan's cold system. When Grace explained her plan, they agreed without pause. "We want to feel proud again," Maria said softly. She reached out to Aaron, a sous chef who had once saved a wedding dinner when the ovens failed. He remembered the nights Grace had brought him coffee during double shifts. "You never forgot us," he said. "So, I won't forget you." The last call was to Howard Ellis. At 67, Howard had once been a manager at a mountain lodge in North Carolina. He had retired after illness, but his wisdom still carried weight. Grace had met him at a conference years ago, where he had spoken about the dignity of service. "They call me old-fashioned," he told her now, "but maybe old-fashioned is what the world needs. I'll be your advisor." And so, the team gathered, not in a sleek boardroom, but in a renovated inn with wooden floors and wide porches. They sat together at a long table, passing notebooks, mugs of sweet tea, and stories. Grace laid out the framework of Hearthline, and together they filled it with life. The front porch. Promise became 6 simple rituals: a genuine greeting by name, offering water before asking for credit cards, taking a moment to notice weariness in a guest's eyes, a handwritten note for anniversaries, remembering small details like a favorite drink or a child's teddy bear, and finally, a farewell as personal as the welcome. The Warm Hands Fund was simple too. A portion of profits set aside, confidential and quick, for staff facing hardship. Maria wept when she heard it. "No one has ever thought of us first," she said. Then came the idea of listening hours. Once a week, a manager would sit in the lobby, not to direct, but to listen to staff, to guests, to anyone with a story. It was small, but powerful. As they worked, stories surfaced. Maria spoke of how Ethan had cut her vacation time without warning. Linda recalled the shame of being told her years of service were replaceable. Aaron admitted he had once thought of quitting the industry entirely. Each wound bound them tighter, a shared memory of dignity lost. Now, together, they were determined to reclaim it. In the evenings, they walked the properties. Grace asked them to imagine touches of welcome wooden rocking chairs on the porch, pitchers of lemon iced tea, soft cushions on the swings. She wanted every arrival to feel less like a transaction and more like stepping into a neighbor's home. The principle was simple use names, not numbers. Look people in the eye. Listen longer than necessary. The details cost little, but carried weight. One night, as the sun set over the marshes of Savannah, the team gathered on the porch. Fireflies dotted the twilight. Howard rocked gently in a chair, his voice slow and steady. "We're not just building a service. We're building a way of seeing." Grace listened, her heart swelling. For weeks she had carried only rejection and fear. Now she carried hope, not flashy, not loud, but steady, like the heartbeat of a house. When the first property finally stood ready, the air was thick with anticipation. Fresh paint gleamed on the porch rails. Rocking chairs waited side by side. Pitchers of tea chilled in glass jars. Staff stood in quiet formation, their uniforms neat, their eyes nervous but proud. Then, from down the street, came the sound of rolling luggage. The first guest was arriving. Grace felt the entire team hold its breath. The moment was small, a single traveler, stepping up onto the wooden porch. But for Grace, and for those who stood beside her, it was the beginning of everything. At last, the numbers told the truth. Kindness had profit. Within weeks of the Hearthline launch in Savannah and Charleston, the metrics began to climb. Guest satisfaction scores rose by 12% in the first month. Average length of stay ticked upward. Repeat bookings doubled compared to the same quarter the year before. Grace watched the charts appear on her laptop. But this time, they didn't feel like weapons or accusations. They felt like confirmation. Each percentage point wasn't abstract. It was a reflection of a smile, a thank you, a guest who felt seen. The staff noticed the shift first. Guests lingered on porches after check-in, sipping lemon-iced tea, sharing stories with housekeepers who were no longer invisible. Families asked to take photos in the rocking chairs, calling them the best welcome in the South. Word of mouth spread faster than any ad campaign. Then came the letter. It arrived in an envelope with slanted handwriting, postmarked from South Carolina. Grace opened it in the small back office, surrounded by her team. The letter was from an elderly woman named Mrs. Caldwell, not related to Ethan's family, but carrying the same name. She had stayed in Charleston with her granddaughter. Her words were simple. I am 82 years old. I have traveled all my life. I thought the world had grown too fast for me. Too many screens, too few faces. Then I came to Hearth and Harbor. A young man carried my bag without being asked. A woman brought me tea when she noticed my cough. And when I left, they waved from the porch as though I belonged there. For the first time in years, I did not feel old. I felt human. Thank you. Silence filled the room as Grace read aloud. Maria dabbed her eyes. Howard cleared his throat, looking away. Even Aaron, rough around the edges, muttered, That's why we're here. Grace folded the letter carefully, placing it in a frame on the wall. This, she said quietly, is worth more than any award. But recognition came anyway. Local newspapers wrote about the return of the Southern Porch. Travel magazines highlighted the front porch promise as a model for modern hospitality. Bloggers posted photos of lemonade pitchers, calling them symbols of kindness that money can't buy. And with each article, bookings swelled, revenue followed. Grace launched a scholarship program for frontline workers' children, funded by the growing Warm Hands Fund. The announcement made staff weep. No one has ever thought about our kids, Linda whispered, hugging Grace tightly. The pride in the team deepened. They weren't just employees. They were custodians of something sacred. Each act of care fed not just the guest experience, but their own sense of dignity. Meanwhile, Grace felt a quiet peace bloom in her chest. After months of doubt and despair, her work had borne fruit. She walked through the porches at dusk, hearing laughter, smelling sweet tea and lemon, watching fireflies rise. Each night, she whispered thanks to Rebecca for believing, to her team for trusting, to Margaret Caldwell for planting the seed years ago. But success never lives in isolation. Back in Nashville, storm clouds gathered. Reports trickled in Caldwell House ratings were falling. Guests complained of cold kiosks and absent staff. Videos of long check-in lines went viral. Profits dipped. Ethan was scrambling, his polished numbers unraveling. Grace read the headlines with a mix of sorrow and inevitability. The contrast was stark. Where kindness lived, growth followed. Where humanity was stripped away, decline set in. She closed her laptop gently. She would not gloat, but she understood the storm in Nashville was only beginning, and somewhere in her bones, she knew that her path and Ethan's were not finished crossing. Failure has its own sound. It is the shrinking voice of a man who once spoke too loudly. News of Caldwell House's decline reached Grace long before Ethan did. 3 major conference contracts canceled in a single month. Reviews dragging the once proud name through mud. Banks tightening their grip. Creditors circling. The marble lobby that had once shimmered under chandeliers now stood half empty. Staff thinned. Smiles gone brittle. Grace read the articles with a steady gaze. She felt no glee, no satisfaction. Only a quiet ache for the people still working there, the ones who had once carried trays, folded sheets, opened doors. They were paying the price for choices made above them. It was late afternoon when her phone rang. She didn't recognize the number. For a moment, she considered letting it pass, but something made her swipe to answer. "Grace," the voice said, softer than she remembered. "It's Ethan." Silence stretched. She could almost hear him breathing, waiting. "I'd like to see you," he continued. "I owe you more than I can explain over the phone." Grace leaned against her desk, her hand tightening on the edge. Memories surged the ballroom, his cold dismissal, the box in her arms. But she said only, "Why now?" His reply cracked in places. "Because everything I thought was unshakable has fallen. And because I finally see that I was wrong." They met 2 days later in a quiet cafe, far from cameras and investors. Ethan arrived looking older, his tailored suit still fit, but it hung differently, as though his shoulders had surrendered some of their weight. Lines carved deep around his eyes. The arrogance that once walked ahead of him had faded. Grace sat across from him, her back straight. She waited. He cleared his throat. "I'll spare you the rehearsed speech. You saw what happened. We're bleeding. Guests don't trust us. Staff are leaving. The board has lost confidence." His voice faltered, then steadied. "I drove us into the ground." For a long moment, Grace said nothing. She studied him, searching for the man who had once humiliated her before a room full of investors. She found pieces, remnants of pride, yes, but also something else: exhaustion, humility, maybe even regret. Finally, Ethan lifted his eyes to hers. His words came blunt, without polish. "I need you back, not as a secretary, as president, or if you prefer we can merge Caldwell House into Hearth and Harbor. You would lead it. I would step aside." The words hung heavy in the air, short, sharp, undeniable. Grace's breath caught. Months ago, such an offer would have felt like vindication, a crown placed where once there had been ashes. But now, she thought of Margaret Caldwell's letter. She thought of porches in Savannah, of Maria and Linda, of iced tea and laughter. Success had already found her, but it had not come from titles or power. It had come from remembering faces. She let the silence linger. Ethan shifted, unaccustomed to waiting for an answer. "I'm not giving you flattery," he said quickly. "I know I wronged you. I know I dismissed you because of pride. But Grace, if Caldwell House is to survive, it needs your vision, not mine." The cafe around them buzzed with small sounds, cups clinking, doors opening, chairs scraping. Grace's mind wandered back to the ballroom where he had once ended her career with a sentence. Now, here he was, sentences softer, almost pleading. She folded her hands on the table. "You want me to return to the place where you broke me?" Ethan flinched, but did not argue. "Yes." Grace looked out the window, where rain streaked the glass. She felt the ache of old wounds and the pull of new strength. The decision was not simple. It was not about revenge or vindication. It was about who she had become since leaving. "Finally," she said, "if we meet again, it won't be in cafes or offices. It will be in the Caldwell Ballroom, the same place where you ended me. That is where I'll listen." Ethan nodded slowly, understanding. "Then we'll meet there." His voice was hushed, stripped of command. As he rose to leave, Grace stayed seated. She needed the stillness. She needed the weight of the moment to settle. The man who once fired her in public had now asked her to return in power, and soon, in that same ballroom, their paths would collide once more. Sometimes, the dead speak louder than the living. The old Caldwell Ballroom was quiet that night. No music, no polished banquets, only amber light from chandeliers and the faint creak of wooden floors that had seen 100 dances. Grace stood near the center, her hands folded in front of her. She could almost see the memory of her last time here, the sting of humiliation, the silence of the crowd. Tonight felt different. Tonight. The room was hers. Ethan entered slowly, not with the stride of a man in control, but with the weight of someone carrying defeat. His suit was still pressed, but his shoulders sagged. He looked around, as though the walls themselves judged him. They faced each other across the wide floor. For a long moment, neither spoke. Finally, Grace reached into her bag. She drew out a folded sheet of ivory paper, worn at the edges, ink faded but legible. "This," she said softly, "was written by your mother?" Ethan froze. His eyes widened. He took a hesitant step forward. "You kept it," Grace nodded. "She gave it to me years ago, told me to protect it until the right moment." She held it out. "I think that moment is now." With trembling hands, Ethan accepted the letter. He unfolded it slowly, as if afraid it might crumble. The ballroom seemed to hush, the air holding its breath. His mother's handwriting curved across the page, elegant and strong. Grace spoke quietly, letting the words carry. "A house is not stone, nor crystal, nor ledgers. It is faces. To lead it, you must know them. You must remember their names, their stories, their burdens. Stand at the door as though it were your own front porch, and greet each one as kin. If ever you forget this, you will lose not just the house, but yourself." Each sentence fell heavy, like a stone into still water. Ethan's lips parted as he read silently along, his eyes flicking over the words his mother had once written. His breath hitched. "Do not let pride blind you. Do not confuse profit with purpose. A leader's true inheritance is not wealth, but trust. Guard it as you would guard family." Ethan's jaw tightened. The letter shook in his grip. He closed his eyes, as though bracing against a storm that rose from within. Grace remained silent, letting the letter do what her arguments never could. After a long moment, Ethan lowered the page. His voice cracked. "She wrote this for you, for anyone who would listen." Grace said gently, "But I don't think you ever did." He turned away, his hand covering his face, shoulders heaving, pride unraveling. The ballroom floor creaked under his step as he paced. "I thought I was honoring her," he muttered, "by making the business bigger, stronger, by chasing numbers." His voice grew hoarse, but all I did was betray her. Grace watched, her expression steady but not cruel. For years she had carried the burden of his dismissal, the wound of his arrogance. Now she saw the man cracked open by words older than both of them. Ethan pressed the letter to his chest. His hands trembled. "I've been living for my ego, not for the house, not for her, not for anyone but myself." The chandeliers flickered, shadows stretching across the floor. Grace took a step closer, her voice calm. "This is the truth. Ethan, your mother knew it, I knew it, and somewhere inside, so did you." He lifted his eyes to hers. For the first time, they were stripped of command, vulnerable, searching. "What do I do now?" he whispered. Grace didn't answer right away. She let the silence deepen, the weight of the moment press down. The letter still trembled in his grasp, his knuckles white around the fragile paper. "At last," she said, "that's not my choice to make. You have to decide if you will keep betraying her or finally honor her." Ethan bowed his head, slowly, carefully. He folded the letter. His hand shook so badly that the crease was uneven. He pressed it flat, but the tremor did not stop. When he looked up again, his eyes were wet. The letter was back in his pocket now, but the truth of it was etched on his face. The heir who once shouted had been silenced by his own mother's hand. And the decision of what would come next lay not in his power, but in Grace's. True victory is not reclaiming a throne, it is walking past it, calm and free. The ballroom still carried the weight of the letter. Ethan stood with his mother's words trembling in his pocket, his eyes red from the weight of confession. He looked at Grace as though she were his last anchor. "Take it," he said, his voice hoarse. "Take the company. Lead it. Save it." Grace's gaze was steady. She thought of the offer, of the power now laid at her feet. Once, not long ago, it might have been irresistible, but tonight she felt no hunger for it. She felt clarity instead. "I won't return," she said softly. Ethan blinked. "You won't know." Her tone was firm but gentle. "Caldwell House broke me once. If I step back into that role, I would always be defined by it. That isn't victory. That's a chain." Silence spread across the wooden floor. Ethan's jaw tightened as though bracing for rejection's sting, but Grace continued, her voice like a quiet lantern in the dark. "I don't want your throne. I want your people to have a choice. Every staff member who wishes can transfer to Hearth and Harbor. They'll receive fair wages, dignity, and the chance to belong again. Not as numbers, as names." Ethan's lips parted, but no words came. "And," Grace added, "I want a fund, a permanent one, named for your mother. It will serve frontline workers across the whole industry. Medical bills, family emergencies, tuition. Her name should stand for what she believed kindness." The proposal hung in the air, unpolished but radiant. Ethan swallowed, his Adam's apple rising and falling. "That would mean the end of Caldwell House," he whispered. Grace shook her head gently. "Not the end. A transformation. You can cling to Marble, or you can let her legacy breathe again through people. The choice is yours." Ethan turned away, staring at the chandelier's reflection on the floor. His shoulders rose and fell. For years, he had lived by numbers, by contracts, by acquisitions. Now the only thing that mattered was letting go. Finally, he moved to the table in the corner. Papers already lay there, bank demands, board resolutions, the brittle scaffolding of a collapsing empire. Grace slid a fresh document forward. Transfer rights. The Margaret Caldwell Fund Charter. The pen felt heavy in his hand. For a long moment, Ethan didn't move. His pride fought, whispering that surrender meant defeat. But the letter in his pocket pressed against his chest, and he heard his mother's words again. "Guard trust as you would guard family." With a trembling breath, he signed. The scratch of ink against paper was soft, almost tender. Yet, in that sound, an empire shifted. Grace exhaled quietly, not triumph, not conquest, peace. She gathered the papers, sliding them into her folder. Then she turned to Ethan. "Thank you. This is the right choice." His eyes followed her, wide with something like loss. "And you?" he asked. "What will you do now?" Grace allowed herself a small smile. "Keep building porches. Keep calling people by name. Keep promises." She moved toward the ballroom doors, her steps unhurried. The click of her heels echoed through the empty hall, a rhythm of departure. Ethan remained by the table, the signed documents before him. His hand still trembled faintly. He lifted his gaze one last time as she reached the doorway. She didn't look back, and in that stillness, Ethan understood the greatest loss was not the contracts, not the balance sheets. It was her. What if the greatest strategy was simply remembering someone's name on the front porch? The stage at the National Hospitality Summit gleamed under bright lights. Rows of executives, managers, and frontline workers filled the ballroom of the convention center. Screens glowed with logos and charts, but when Grace Whitaker stepped to the podium, she carried none of that. She carried only her story. Her hands rested lightly on the wood. She let the room quiet itself. She had learned long ago that silence, held long enough, speaks louder than microphones. "When I stood in a ballroom, not unlike this," she began, her voice steady, "I carried a box in my hands. My name was called out, not in honor, but in dismissal. That night, I wondered if all my work, all my care, had been wasted. A ripple passed through the audience. People leaned forward. But here's what I learned," Grace continued. "Titles can be stripped away. paychecks can disappear, yet dignity, if you choose to hold on to it, remains. And dignity, shared, becomes strength. Her words were plain, but they carried weight. She told them about the days of rejection, the bills stacking on her kitchen table. She spoke of nights spent doubting herself, of selling her grandfather's rocking chair, of walking among headstones where promises lingered. The room listened, hushed, and then, she said softly, came the letter. She didn't need to explain further. Many had read the articles, heard whispers of the Caldwell downfall. Instead, she lifted her chin. A letter that reminded me of something we all forget. A house is not ledgers, it is faces. And if you forget those faces, you lose yourself. Applause began, but she raised a hand gently. I don't want your applause, she said. I want your attention for one simple truth. Kindness is not charity, it is strategy. The words landed like stones dropped into still water. She told them about hearth and harbor, about porches rebuilt, about rocking chairs and iced tea, about guests greeted not with scripts, but with names remembered. She painted small pictures, Maria the housekeeper, given time to attend her daughter's recital, Linda the receptionist, whose medical bills were covered by the Warm Hands Fund. These are not gestures, Grace said. They are structures. They are strategy written in human ink. And the return on investment loyalty, trust, growth, numbers that finally speak truth. On the screen behind her appeared not graphs, but a simple photo. The wide porch of a Hearth and Harbor Inn, sunlight falling across wooden planks, two guests in rocking chairs with lemonade glasses in their hands. The audience stirred, some smiling, some wiping at their eyes. Grace leaned closer to the microphone. To everyone here over 50, who remembers when neighbors knew each other's names, you know what I'm talking about? We don't need faster check-ins. We need slower moments. We don't need more apps. We need more eyes lifted from screens, more voices calling names, more hands reaching out. Her tone grew gentler, almost a whisper. Our industry will not be saved by speed. It will be saved by stillness, by remembering that hospitality is not service, but kinship. Silence followed, then applause long, steady, rising. Grace let it come, then softened it with one final truth. I was once dismissed as a secretary who cared too much, and maybe that was the truth. But if caring too much is a mistake, then I hope more of us make it. Because the biggest mistake, as one millionaire learned, is firing the secretary who truly cared. The words drew the room to its feet. A standing ovation, not for her alone, but for the dignity she carried forward. As the applause rolled, Grace stepped back from the podium. Behind her, the screen displayed 4 words: the front porch promise. Later, in the mingling crowd, journalists asked about expansion, investors about numbers. Grace answered politely but briefly. Her eyes were already far away, on porches not yet built, on names not yet remembered. Before leaving, she offered one invitation. Think of a moment, she said, when you were truly heard, when someone called you by name, listened without rushing, cared without counting. Hold on to that moment, then go give it to someone else. That was her closing note, not a contract, not a chart, an invitation. And as the lights dimmed, the image on the screen remained a porch, 2 rocking chairs, sunlight on wood, a promise that kindness, carried forward, could outlast empires. In the end, Grace's journey reminds us that true power does not come from titles, wealth, or marble halls. It comes from how we treat one another. A secretary dismissed as too caring proved the kindness, when practiced with courage, can transform not only a business but an entire industry. For those of us who have lived long enough to see success and failure, her story carries a quiet truth. Dignity is not given by others. It is something we hold on to ourselves. Grace refused to let humiliation define her. She chose to honor people by name, to listen, to slow down long enough to see the human being standing in front of her. We, too, face choices each day. Do we rush past others, focused only on efficiency, or do we take a moment to notice, to listen, to remember? Grace's story shows that the smallest gestures, calling someone by name, extending a hand, offering time, can become the foundation of legacies that outlast fortune and fame. Perhaps the greatest lesson is simple kindness is not weakness, it is strength. And sometimes, the most lasting victories are won not by defeating others, but by lifting them up. Thank you, dear friends, for spending your time with this story. If it touched your heart, if it reminded you of the quiet strength of kindness, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who may need encouragement, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more stories that shine a light on the human spirit.